The newer truck continued to run along the unpaved road for what seemed like forever. Fatigue and exhaustion overtook the American couple and they drifted off to sleep. Before the monotony overtook them, they had been offered some food and water by the English-speaking soldier. Michael remained alert for a long time after Christina drifted off to sleep on his lap. A nagging worry that Domak Gat Enil might try to approach his wife dogged him even when sleep finally claimed him. Their brief respite did not last, interrupted by powerful gunshots. Looking around, they were met with images of soldiers firing bursts of automatic fire into the air. At first they assumed hostile forces were lay hidden in a nearby stand of trees. But oddly, each and every soldier seemed to be shooting aimlessly into the sky, nor were they concentrating their fire at a specific target or aircraft. Then, they heard a few of the soldiers begin to laugh and scream in inexpressible delight. It was the educated Nuerian soldier who barked an order which was followed with an immediate ceasefire. Michael was curious enough to ask his former fellow citizen to explain the reason behind the fire-at-will incident. There were no enemies or ambushes, but Domak Gat Enil had opened fire, encouraging his comrades to concentrate their fire at the clump of tall trees, positively identifying Dinkas, and as dictated by their shoot first, ask questions later policy, his comrades joined in the fray. He was also told that Domak Gat Enil detested the Dinkas because they had recently raided his village and killed his father, mother, brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, aunties, grandpas, and grandmas. They had killed everyone in the village including the domestic animals. Their cows were spared but were stolen. Michael now understood Domak Gat Enil's issues, and inwardly he wondered if he had ever heard about the saving grace of Christ who taught his disciples, "Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you, and persecute you." Matthew 5:44. The truck resumed its endless journey in the early morning hours. They continued to bounce along the rough road right up until the evening. Occasionally, the engine would stall and the truck would grind to a halt. At this point the soldiers would have to push start the beast again. Very often, it got thirsty and they had to stop and give it water. By now it was clear that traveling by pack mules would have been faster, with them covering far more distance in relative comfort. Many times, Domak Gat Enil's eyes would glaze over when he remembered his lost family and his decimated village. After which he would inevitably open fire on some imaginary group of Dinka and led others to join his deadly assault. Each time they opened fire, it terrified the couple. Only madmen or those demon-possessed would continually shoot at random objects, wasting ammunition. He was like Don Quixote who fought the windmills. Michael had a feeling that Domak Gat Enil was not just imagining the trees to be people but in his mind he actually seeing tall, sullen Dinkas. Whenever he fell into that psychotic episode, he would begin shooting regardless of what anyone else was doing. Before long, a few of his colleagues would join him in fun or to soothe their hatred for their enemies. Finally, the educated soldier had no choice but to pass the order to cease and desist. No one was allowed to join Domak when he had one of these episodes. The leader was concerned about conserving munitions should there be an ambush or a protracted engagement with the enemy. In either case, it was a major breach of protocol. Domak Gat Enil was now the boy who cried wolf. Whenever he opened fire no one bothered to look at him or mimic his action. After the sunset, the newer fighters broke their journey. All of them, including their leader and Domak, were soon claimed by a dreamless, deep asleep. None had slept during the long trip, and Michael and Christina remained awake and conversant for long time after the soldiers went to sleep. They could not run away as their feet were in fetters. They were surrounded by the soldiers in every direction. Michael told Christina to sleep while he kept watch. He did not fully trust his companions. He was worried that his wife, being the only female for miles around, be victim to companionship-starved soldiers. Not long after many fell asleep, Michael noticed unusual movement inside the truck. He saw a soldier getting up from his bunk and begin walking slowly and tentatively. Michael had no doubts that the soldier had feigned sleep just so he could move about on the sly. He must be up to no good. He might try to approach Christina thinking her husband to be asleep. But, the soldier passed them without touching them. Puzzled and pretending to be asleep, Michael realized the soldier had other ideas. Michael started to make sense of the matter. Maybe he was trying to steal something from his fellow soldiers or ever do great harm to someone. Michael continued to observe the movements of the Nuerian man until he saw him reach the other end of the truck. No one was aware of his movement. Finally, the soldier was observed gently setting himself down close to another sleeping soldier, touching him, almost tenderly. Roused from his sleep, the other soldier neither screamed nor fought back against that man who came so close to him and instead began to return his touches. Michael could not believe his eyes, when he saw the two male soldiers began to touch each other's privates. And before he could digest the scene, they loosened their clothes and began to indulge in sexual activity. At first, he thought that they were gays, but when he saw one lying on top of the other he was mystified. The one below was lying on his back and the one on top, his stomach. Michael could hear their sexual exploits as if they were right there beside him. While Michael was racked his brains trying to figure out how two men could practice sexual intercourse in that way, a similar scene unfolded near his wife. Yet another soldier, between the two coupling and his wife, started to rouse from his sleep. This new activity took him by astonishment because he did not see the second couple slinking in from anywhere. It was clear that the two soldiers were sitting near each other from the get-go and the plan was to indulge their whims once everyone was asleep. They were doing in the same style, one down lying on his back and the other on top of him. Michael did not know what to do. Should he awaken the leader and make him aware of what his soldiers were doing? Or should he awaken his better half and ask her to help him translate what was going on in human language? Yet another two soldiers began to partake in what seemed like a perfectly acceptable after-hours distraction. In fact, the sexual exploits were no longer furtive and secretive encounters between two discreet male lovers. 5 couples were at it and even some were talking to each other while in the midst of feeding their lust. The truck suddenly became so noisy that even Christina might inadvertently be prodded out of her sleep. Michael immediately protected her by placing his right hand over her eyes and told her keep them shut and resist sneaking a look around, whispering urgent orders with bated breath, explaining the goings-on in the truck. With no reason to doubt her husband, she killed the urge to look at the scene her husband had painted in her mind. Why they just jump off the tailgate and indulge themselves under the trees in comfort. By then, the couple completely hemmed in by 7 rutting couples. They could not move a limb, now that the truck was a big bed with 14 people in an orgiastic frenzy, excluding them. It turned into disgusting, filthy and immoral tavern. When the shoveling and kicking of the sexual activities became too much for the couple to tolerate them, Michael shouted to the leader and woke him up. He told him that his soldiers were engaged in disgraceful sodomy. Then, he requested him to ask them to stop it or go down and hide behind the trees or otherwise release his wife and him and allow them go and step down until those shameful activities were over. The leader laughed loudly before told Michael that those were men and women making love to each other. The leader was right, there were 7 female soldiers in that group of newer fighters, but for the American couple all of them looked like men. It took Michael and Christine a long time to believe what they had heard. There were more than 7 couples behaving like animals, engaging in the natural act of mating or copulation. They had been with them all throughout the day and they didn't see a single female among them. All of them were males and looked exactly the same from the outside. Where had the 7 females come from? Unless some of them had mysteriously transformed into females, this riddle made no sense. They had the same short hair on their heads which looked like raisins. There were no apparent breasts or big backsides to indicate that some were females and other were males. They had the same small eyes and big mouths and lips. There were no hint of beauty and female attraction in any one of them, in the traditional sense. Nevertheless, their sexual activities showed that they were mating as males and females. The copulations lasted for a little more than half an hour, and then every partner either returned to his place or fell asleep in the same place. It was another riddle for the American couple that they couldn't solve, that as soon as every finished their mating they simultaneously fell asleep instantly. As if those soldiers answered the call of nature together and retired again. The American couple decided to wait for the morning so that they could either confirm or refute the assertion of the educated soldier. Only Domak Gat-Enil and that English-speaking soldier seemed to be uninterested in sex. At last, even Michael joined his wife and fell asleep beside her. It was still dark when Domak Gat-Enil reopened fire and began shouting, "Dinkas, Dinkas!" Almost all of them heard him raise the alarm, but no one bothered to look or move in response. In the heat of equatorial South Sudan, the soldiers slept like hibernating animals in the Canadian Arctic. The American couple also heard the commotion, but assumed that the Nuerian Don Quixote was going through one of his fits. No one bothered to look, being conscious just long enough to confirm that the voice belonged to their hallucination-prone friend, before sliding back into a welcome sleep. When the Dinkas encroached, no one responded because they accommodated his tirades and hallucinations, quickly dismissing his alarm. The moral of the boy who cried wolf teaches us that, liars are often rewarded as such, even if they tell the truth, no one believes them. Wherefore, the first one shot and killed was Domak Gat-Enil himself. His body crumpled between Michael and Christina and woke them up in terror. When they looked around they saw Dinka soldiers already clambering over the truck. The Dinkas were the tallest people on earth. Before a Dinka's left leg leaves the ground, his right leg would have already reached the truck bed. 85% of a Dinka's height is on his long feet. When you see Dinka men walking you may mistake them for stilt walkers in a parade. Moving quickly and silently, the tall Dinkas stood over their foes and using their guns as clubs, struck the sleeping soldiers to wake them up. The Nuers could do nothing except surrender themselves to the mercy of their bitter enemies. Instead of ordering them to get down, the Dinkas literally pushed each one off the truck. Some of them landed badly on their backs and some broke their legs. At ground level, they were greeted by more than 20 smiling Dinka soldiers. The American couple's fetters saved them from the harsh treatment. Those fetters spoke on their behalf and were a silent testimony to their position as prisoners of the enemy. Therefore, they were released and ordered to get down. It seemed that the Dinkas were more educated than their enemies. At least, 3 of them could communicate in English. They spoke in heavily accented English, but the couple could understand them with little difficulty. Michael hoped that the captive Nuers would be accorded treatment according to the Geneva Convention and taken as war prisoners. He did not want to witness yet again another human massacre. He thanked God that his wife did not watch how the jungle people were massacred in cold blood. He knew that she would pass out if she witnessed such brutality before her eyes. The Dinkas bound the Nuerians hand and feet. They tore off their military uniforms and underwear, leaving them stark naked. Following that, they hung them upside down from the trees. The Nuers were now like sheep being prepared for skinning. After that, the Dinkas brought heavy sticks and began to flog them. The flogging was concentrated on the legs, backs, stomachs, and shoulders. The Dinkas avoided striking their heads because they did not want them to faint or die quickly. They wanted them to feel the pain as long as possible. Even the harshest interrogation method wasn't that cruel as that had been done by the Dinkas to their enemies the Nuers. They were acting as if they had been trained by the mafia in how to torture their victims without killing them. Domak Gat-Enil was the only Nuerian soldier who was shot in the head and instantly killed and so suffered a relatively peaceful demise. The Nuerian soldiers began to scream as loud as they could from the pain being inflicted on them. Christina also began to cry with them. Michael tried to convince her to stop crying. He worried that her reaction might be interpreted by the Dinkas as being sympathetic to the Nuers. Nonetheless, she kept on crying and begging the floggers to stop beating those helpless soldiers. No one of them bothered and continued to flogging the hanging bodies until their skins could bleed no more. The cruel flogging went on until all the Nuers stopped moaning and mercifully fell unconscious. The floggers were also tired and exhausted, and were replaced by another detail of fresh Dinka soldiers who continued the flogging until their captives were lifeless corpses. After that they shot the lifeless corpses in the heads to ensure that they were dead. The bodies were left hanging in the trees. Even Domak Gat Enyal was hauled off the truck and hung along with his comrades. As if to satisfy a terrible itch, they flogged his dead body for some time and then shot him once again in the head.